My name is Richard Furrow, and I can say I am cloud hired.
That yes, come and join and get cloud hired. I'm cloud hired.
I'm cloud hired.
I'm cloud hired.
Hey, Go Cloud Architect family. I'm cloud hired.
So I'm cloud hired, guys.
So I'll just say I'm cloud hired.
I'm cloud hired.
I'm cloud hired thanks to Go Cloud Architects.
It worked for me, and now I'm cloud hired. Because of Google Architect program, I am cloud hired. See!
I am cloud hired. Thank you, Mike and the Glow Cloud team.
Welcome, everyone. This is Michael Gibbs. I'm joined here with Alonzo Coleman, and today we're here to help answer your technology career questions. My name is Mike Gibbs, and I've been an IT architect now for almost a quarter of a century. Actually, it's more than that at this point. And I've been a network architect, a cloud architect, an enterprise architect, even a business architect. And I've been teaching and coaching others for more than 2 decades, and I want to help you build your absolute best career. I'm joined by Alonzo Coleman. He's our Chief Marketing Officer. He is an exceptionally good cloud architect, but he helps teach our students how to brand themselves and our clients how to brand themselves. So employers come reaching out to our clients. Our clients, typically speaking, don't even need to apply for a job. So if you got any how to build your professional brand questions, Alonzo is your person. He's got 30 years executive experience. He holds an MBA. Actually, we both do. And we've got a lot of people hired at every organization you can think of: Apple, Amazon, Cisco, Google, Microsoft, IBM, Accenture, Deloitte, KPMG, Capgemini, PricewaterhouseCoopers, TELUS, you name it. So Alonzo and I have gotten a lot of people hired, and we are here to help answer your questions. If your goal is to be a cloud architect, ask us how. If you want to be a cloud engineer, ask us how. If you want to know the difference between a cloud architect and a cloud engineer so you can prepare properly, we'd be honored to do so. Want to learn how to be a security architect? We'll tell you. Want to be an AI architect? And we even have a program for that. We'll tell you how to do it. Or an enterprise architect. So ask us your correct questions. So you don't learn by making errors, and you don't take costly mistakes. So the faster you can get to your goals, the happier we are for you, and the more you'll earn and the better opportunity you'll have. So ask us your questions, and Alonzo and I will answer them. A couple of free things we have that I wanted to tell you about before we begin. Please sign up for the completely free AWS Solutions Architect Associate Plus Bootcamp, which we're going to be holding in about 4 weeks from now. It's going to be completely free. It'll be live. You'll come, you'll ask questions. We'll do anything we can to help you, and it'll be completely free, so please sign up. The next thing that we typically talk about, I wanted to tell you about, is we have a completely free how to get your first cloud architect job, both ebook and webinar. Register for the ebook in the description of this video. Register for the webinar that we have tomorrow, and it's going to be live on Zoom. Love to see you there. We'll tell you what we do as cloud architects. We'll talk about the job itself. We'll talk about how to skip those HR people that are going to just auto-reject you if you don't have the perfect resume. We'll tell you the exact set of skills that you need to be highly successful in this career. And it'll be on Zoom, so you can ask us questions. Want to see if you're ready for an interview? We'll tell you. We can assess you. So come join. It's free. It's lots of fun. And my team and I will be there to help you in your career. So completely free. So bring us your questions so we can assist you.
All right. Cloud Doctor again. Welcome back. We always love your questions. What are the key differences, Mike, between an enterprise and a cloud architect?
Cloud Doctor, that is a really great question. And In today's world, the lines of all architects are kind of blurred. So let's talk about what architects do, and then I'll talk about the specifics. Here's what the architect does. The architect asks the client about the business goals and the vision for their business. Where they want to be now, 6 months from now, 5 years from now, 10 years from now, and 20 years from now, because most CEOs of big publicly traded companies are focused on things 5, 10, and 20 years in the future. The next thing the architect does, Cloud Doctor, whether they're a cloud architect or an enterprise architect, is they learn how the business operates, the business processes, the way the organization does things, like how the product is manufactured per se, or how a product is serviced, or how the sales reps do their job. It's all the business processes. And the architect must learn about these business processes, because if the business has new goals for the future, they have to optimize those business processes in order to get it to work. So that's the next thing that an architect does. Now, then the architect has to work with the organization to figure out the optimal business processes and help re-architect them. At this point, the architect can look at the organization's technology, the organization's data, all the organization's systems, and say, here's what they have now. What are the goals the organization has for the future and the business process of the future? And then they evaluate whether the current technology platform that they have now will get them to their goals, or they need a new design. And then the architect will redesign those systems for those optimized business processes based upon the business vision. Now, after that, the architect will have to build an architecture team, lead a team to design the architecture, document the architecture, present it to the key stakeholders, sell the architecture, sell the vision of the architecture, negotiate the architecture, determine the types of people that are going to be necessary to deploy the architecture, and actually build it, because architects don't build anything, we design systems. And then typically the type of governance strategy the organizations will need to manage these architectures moving forward. And then we go work on another architecture project, or we go to another customer, whether if we're in sales. So that's what we do as architects. So now let's look at it from the top down. You have the chief information officer, which for the most part is our bosses. If an organization has an enterprise architecture practice, it is an extreme executive, almost no technology in the enterprise architect. It's a very business role, 80+ % business, and about 20% technology. And what the enterprise architect does is they lead a team of specialty architects to help design the systems for the organization strategy. So when I work as an enterprise architect, underneath me, I have a cloud architect responsible for the cloud architectures. I will have an IAM architect related to the IAM architectures. I will have a security architect related to security. I will have a network architect working with me, for me. I will have an AI architect working through me, and many, many more people. So you can see that enterprise architect is the top most strategic position. And because it's most strategic, and it covers a wide array of an organization's people, processes, and technology, it's not very technical at all. It is a real heavy-duty executive position. Now, the cloud architect, because they're going to be, sort of in a non-management style, kind of reporting into that enterprise architect kind of role that's going to be leading the strategic change. The cloud architect is going to be responsible for the cloud. And what is the cloud in today's world? An organization's data center running Nutanix or OpenStack is a cloud. An organization running VMware, guess what? That's still a cloud. Why is it a cloud? Because basically the whole data center is virtualized. All their servers are virtualized. In many cases, the storage and the network is virtualized. And the organization can spin up resources on any of the servers they have on demand, just like a public cloud. So a cloud architect could be responsible for the organization's private cloud. The cloud architect would be responsible for the organization's, single cloud or multi-cloud, and it's multi-cloud in 98% of all organizations. So the cloud architect would design all the systems that are going to be based on the cloud. And the cloud is everything. Every single data center is a cloud at this point. Every cloud provider is a cloud. So now you're looking at pretty much the cloud architect being the all-encompassing person responsible for a lot of the technology designs. Now, the cloud architect will need specialty architects working for them. Because what is cloud computing, Cloud Doctor? It's just renting space in someone else's network and data center. That's it. So at the top of the architecture world, you have the enterprise architect. Now you're going to have the cloud architect. And underneath the cloud architect, they may have the specialty architects working for them. The cloud architect is going to bring in a security architect to help with cloud security. The cloud architect is going to bring in a network architect to help with network architecture. The cloud architect is going to bring in an IAM architect to help work on the IAM architecture. The cloud architect is going to bring in an AI architect to help with the AI. So what you're starting to see is, while the enterprise architect is more business and the cloud architect is a little more techie, if an organization doesn't have an enterprise architect, that cloud architect ends up by default doing enterprise architecture, because they need someone to lead all the technology charters and change. So the cloud architect is a 50 to 80% business role and 20 to 50% technology role. So the cloud architect is more technical. Still not the most technical position in the world, because no architecture position is, because it's that hybrid business and technology executive. But I hope I answered your question there. Higher up on the architect scale, meaning further abstracted, closer to the business, enterprise architect. The cloud architect is typically a little more technical, and because of that, they're closer to the business, which means they're less abstracted from the technology. Good question, Cloud Doctor. Please feel free to ask more.
Tin Man, Mike, can you talk about things to consider if I'm trying to figure out whether to focus on security or network as a specialty?
So, Tin Man, the first thing I'm going to say is, what do you want to do? What is it you like? So, Tin Man, I can promise you that you can do anything you want that you put your mind to. Daniel Bosa was a 20-year-old that came to us who didn't graduate high school that wanted to be a cloud architect, and we got him a job as a cloud architect. I mean, it's an example. So Al Legister was a sales rep of consumer products, came to us, and he got his first job as a senior solution architect. And Vladimir was a 24-year-old college student before when we got him his first architecture job. And I can do this all day. My point is they got the right training, they put in the work, and they became architects because that was their goal. But you know what? Some people want to be security architects, and some people want to be network architects. And the first thing that I need you to know, Tin Man, you can do anything you desire with the right plan and the right training. So there's that. So the first thing I need you to do is figure out what you want most, because in order to be good at anything and actually have a career that's going to rise, you've got to be great. And if you don't like something, you're never going to be great. You'll never be able to put in the time or the effort or love into it to be great. So the first thing is find what you love. Now, here's a couple of things to consider as you consider your career. Networking and security are both critical. Everybody sees the need for security. And quite frankly, I love security careers. I've trained many security architects and cloud security architects. So I love security. But more people are going into security. It's very overt. We need AI and we need security. And guess what? If you go into security, we'll have a great opportunity now. Networking is still a great opportunity. And here's the reason why. Without the network, nothing works. I mean, nothing. The developers won't even be able to write their code and put it anywhere, let alone pull it from a place like GitHub, because they need the network. The applications won't be able to talk to each other, and you won't be able to access anything without the network. When the network isn't designed properly, the performance won't be there, the availability won't be there, and guess what? The security won't be there either. So the network is the foundation to everything. Now, when I started networking was the in thing. Why was it the in thing? Because the internet started to boom and no one knew how to build these things, let alone design these things. So I went into networking and it was big, 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 big. And then what happened is cloud computing came out and people didn't realize that they needed a network. And that's because most of the certifications that are out there are kind of like hid the network from the people. They actually hid all the technology. You could take an entire certification, learn the name of something and not even know what it is, which is sad, but I've interviewed thousands of people. So they all thought the network was gone. Don't study networking. Don't study networking. Don't study networking. Well, guess what? If you don't know the network, nothing will ever work. So the nice and sneaky thing of networking is a lot of the networking people like me moved into cloud because it made sense to at the time. A lot of new people have not learned networking. So now you're in a world, especially as cloud repatriation occurs and organizations start building more private data centers and cloud architectures become more multi-cloud and more distributed, that the only way to glue these systems together is knowing networking. So now you've got an environment for about 5 to 10 years, nobody learned networking. which means you've got lots of people retiring from networking. A lot of networking people left. And now the network becomes more and more important all over again, like we always knew it did. So that puts you in a good position if you study networking and you get great at networking on the supply and demand curve, where there's lots of good opportunities in networking. So I love networking too. But the real key, Tin Man, is to find something you are passionate about. I don't care what it is. You know, Tin Man, I studied internal medicine. I'm a nurse practitioner. And truth be told, I like doing it. But I was so passionate about tech that from the time I said I was going to learn technology to the time I was a CCIE was like 9 months, to the time I was a principal architect was less than 2 years. And Tin Man, why is that? Well, first, I got great coaching along the way. But secondly, I loved networking so much that I didn't mind working 8 hours a day, studying networking an extra 8 hours a day from Monday through Friday, and then dedicating from 7 a.m. until 8 p.m. every Saturday and Sunday for the first 2 years of my life to learn networking because I loved it. And if there's a new networking thing out there, I put on my propeller hat, I take off my CEO hat for a few minutes, and I learn it because I love networking. So do what you love, Tin Man. If you've got some questions, please ask them. Alonzo and I really want to help you.
For Rando, is it a bonus to have any cloud certification such as Cloud Plus, CCSP, CCSK as an architect?
So, Rando, let's talk about what certifications do versus what they don't. And yes, we still want to get you some certifications. So I will tell you the first thing that I advise is you have to be careful on the certifications. And here's what I mean. There is no certification out there that teaches cloud architecture, because the certifications that all exist, the AWS Solutions Architect Professional, the Azure Solutions Architect Expert, the Google Professional Cloud Architect, they're really about the name of a service and how to configure that. So instead of talking what a virtual machine is and how a virtual machine would work, they come up with marketing names, which is what half these things are. EC2 instance for a virtual machine, or Azure virtual machine, or Oracle virtual machine, a Google Compute Engine instance, and then they teach you how to turn it on. Now, architects don't do any of that, so it's not really realistic for us. But should you get some cloud certs, the first piece of advice I would give you is to stay away from anything CompTIA. CompTIA certifications are fine. The quality of them, the content of them is excellent. And I will tell you, I actually think in most cases better than the vendor certifications. But here's the problem. Management has been conditioned to know that CompTIA certifications are too easy, too junior, and they don't mean anything to them. So when we see an A+, Net+, Security+, what we see is a resume for someone that's going to work at the Best Buy Geek Squad, even though they could be super smart and learn so much in the process of these resumes. Now, that doesn't mean that someone with an A+, Net+, or a Security+ isn't awesome, but it's not going to have that pull that we want from a certification. And what do we want from a certification right now? We want to build your brand to help you get more interviews. And that's really what we're looking to do with the certifications, because they're not necessarily very relevant for our assignment. So I tell my clients to get 2 to 3 really good certifications, and I'll tell you what I mean by them. Now, Rando, the next thing as pertains to certifications is not to get a bunch of associate certifications. So there's some dangerous advice out there that says you should do the AWS Cloud Practitioner, the Solutions Architect Associate, the Developer Associate, the DevOps Associate, and the SysOps Associate. And here's why I say don't do that. To a hiring manager, an associate certification might mean almost ready to do something. And if you get certified in 5 different specialties or 5 different careers, almost with enough skill to do something, it still doesn't make you look good enough to an employer to hire you. But it's like, how many times can someone go to high school versus getting a PhD? Which is more impressive to you, the fact that someone went to high school 5 times, or the fact that someone has a PhD? So now that we've talked about that, let's talk about how to use these certifications. For the cloud architect, I like to get one good cloud certification. And I want something with a big brand and a huge amount of market share, because not enough people realize that all clouds are pretty much the same thing. It's just the name is different. So you've got some recruiters that are going to key in and say, oh, I need an Azure cert. I can't use the AWS cert. So I'd say do the AWS cert or the Azure cert, one of them at the professional level, like the AWS Solutions Architect Expert and the AWS Solutions Architect Professional or the Azure Solutions Architect Expert. So there's that. The next thing I like to see is a networking or a security certification. And I'll explain to you why. All cloud computing is somebody else's network in a data center that's virtualized. And if you're going to be an architect and you're going to take the stuff, virtual machines, storage, containers, what have you, from the database and move it to the cloud, you need to know what it is. And you can pass the AWS Solutions Architect Professional and have no knowledge about storage area network, compute, security, literally anything. And I've interviewed 1,000+ AWS certified people and found they didn't know. So if you know the network, well, you already know half of the cloud. So like a networking certification like the CCNP looks very good and strong when you want to be a cloud architect. Now, I'll tell you, a lot of my students I encourage to get a CISSP. In fact, I'm doing CISSP training with my students this month. And that's a cybersecurity certification. Now, a lot of people will say, I can't take it. I don't have 5 years experience. That is nonsense. You can take the certification regardless of your level of experience. You can pass the certification regardless of your level of experience. But if you don't have 5 years experience, you're going to have to put a CISSP-associate on your resume, which every hiring manager knows you did the full-fledged CISSP. You've got full-fledged CISSP knowledge. You just don't have 5 years experience, which in some cases makes you more impressive because you were able to pass a complicated certification without even having any experience.
Very true.
So again, love that. So it's showing you that you're good. So I like to say the CCNP versus the CISSP. Either one is a good one. One focuses on security. In fact, the CISSP is very architecture-like in the fact that it focuses on the business the entire time. So great certifications in either one. Now, Rando, I've changed my mind and added this to my third list of certifications, and it is the TOGAF 10. And I'll tell you why I like the TOGAF 10. Because so many people have taken these cloud certifications and they learned how to be cloud administrators. And 70+% of all technology projects fail to derive any transformation or business benefit. 7 out of 10 are disasters, meaning a company spends money and gets nothing back. Imagine spending, $1 billion and getting nothing back for it. Pretty horrible. So for that reason, I need our architects to focus on the business, to focus on the organizational vision, to focus on the business processes, for example, to examine the technology and how it works, to think about the people, the processes, and technology. Now, Rando, obviously, in every architect that we train, they're taught about how to optimize the business and people, processes, technology. And that's why our architects gets hired in so many places. But if we've got someone that's got a bunch of certifications and the certifications don't really discuss the business at all, or we've got someone that came from a hardcore engineering background who by definition has to focus on the tech because that was their job. And now we're telling them you're not an architect, and they don't know architecture well enough and they don't focus on their business. We get these nasty architecture failures because people aren't focused on the business. So the TOGAF at least is a methodology that says, please start with the business vision, then evaluate the business processes, then evaluate the data, then evaluate the technology. So it guides people on a step-by-step systematic approach so they don't forget what matters most. Look, there's no architecture training in TOGAF, I'm going to tell you right now. It is literally a framework that says, do this, do this, do this. The same way you would teach a doctor. Look, if you're going to examine a patient, you start with their head, look at their eyes, look in their ears, then their nose, then their throat, then check their lymph nodes, et cetera, et cetera. It's just a process. It's just like that. So great question. But the key is these certifications will be like a magnet to getting you an interview. Unfortunately, they don't really contain anything related to getting you hired, but they're like a magnet to getting you an interview. That's not true. The CISSP has some valid things for the security. The CCNP does, but the cloud certifications, not so much. But if you have the right skills and you train for the right skills, and now you've got these certifications that are like a magnet getting you interviews with the hiring manager, if you've got the right skills and done the right training, you'll get hired for any job you want, regardless of your level of experience.
Ross, is it possible, Mike, to have a LinkedIn page evaluated and Twitter/X profile and pinned tweet?
So in our program, we actually teach our students exactly what to do on LinkedIn and exactly what it should be all the time. And we are honored to do so. But, I see no issue looking at a doing a quick LinkedIn once over. If you desire Raz 7, while we're here, just send us a link of your LinkedIn page. But a real thorough review, which things like Twitter, X, and those kinds of things, we don't have time for. But quick review, I think we could do something quick.
Can you please share thoughts regarding a Security Plus certificate, and if it's something to earn as a checkbox for HR filtering and governmental contracts? Mike?
So Raz 7, it depends what your goals are. For any big job in cybersecurity that's going to have high pay, I wouldn't get the Security Plus. Or if I got it, I wouldn't put it on my resume. The brand perception of this is here, where the brand perception of the CISSP is up here. I don't want to be viewed as down here. I want to be viewed as here. So when it comes to getting interviews, as perception. Now, if you want to work for a government contract, you will need the CompTIA Security Plus. So you can totally have two resumes. One resume with the CISSP that you use to apply for high-paying corporate jobs, and another resume that's going to pay obviously much less that you could use for government contracts. Now, government contracts, there's things that are in that are good. You can ultimately work for the government full time, and it may not offer the same financial resources, but it could give you a pension and some wonderful benefits, which could also be something good for you. So that is a choice on what to do. But if I wanted to work for the US government, I would definitely have a Security Plus. If I wanted a high-paying security architect job, I would take the Security Plus off of my resume and I would put a CISSP. So it's really based upon what you're doing and what your goals are. Good question, Raz 7. Please feel free to ask more.
Another one from Ross. Can you touch on pursuing a security architectural role? Would there be offensive security emphasis on primary incident response in IDS and IPS systems?
So, Raz, I will talk about security architect roles, and I've trained many people, and they get them all the time. I will also tell you that it has absolutely zero to do with offensive security. That is related to engineering. And I will also tell you that we'll talk a little bit more about it. So keep that in the back of your mind. Now, if anybody has some questions before I answer this, please ask your questions. We really want to help you in your career. So here's what a security architect does, Raz. The security architect will go to a business and they will determine the organization's risk. So they will have to work with the executives and find out the organization's assets. What is it that needs to be protected? Is it intellectual property, for example? And if so, what level of protection does that need? Is the organization trying to protect a proprietary process? Or what about trade secrets that they have? Now, it could also be that the organization's primary assets are just its customer data, which again could be worth something or not something. So the first thing we need to understand is, what is the organization's asset? And here's the reason why. We're not going to spend $1 billion to protect a $50,000 item. For example, I've got a lot of photos of my cat, Cindy. She's the cutest little girl you've ever seen in your entire life. Sweet little girl, except when she's hunting. So, I've got probably millions, I don't know, at least thousands of photos of my cat, Cindy. I'm not going to buy a bunch of Palo Alto firewalls to secure photos of my cat, Cindy. But I will buy multiple Palo Alto firewalls backed by second levels of Cisco firewalls to protect assets in a business if it's worth it. So that's the key to think about. What is the value of what I'm protecting? The next thing the architect has to do to work with the organization is determine, what is their risk, what is their exposure, and how do they manage that risk? Do they transfer their risk by, say, buying cybersecurity insurance and spend less money on their security infrastructure? Or do they go out there and truly manage that risk by creating a great security architecture? You have to quantify the organization's assets, quantify their risk, and then determine the level of protection. And then as the security architect, you're going to have to evaluate the business. You're going to have to look at what their people are like, because people are the biggest biggest weakness? Are they susceptible to social engineering, for example? Are they susceptible to phishing? And if you're an architect, that firm might actually go out there and do some penetration testing and give you the results, typically prior to you getting there. But an organization can do that testing. It's not you. That's somebody else. That's the engineers that are paid to break into the system to give a report to the executive so they can give you, the architect, these are the weaknesses that the hackers found. So that's somebody else's job. Because remember, architects, Raz, don't touch the technology. We're system designers. We're executives, and we're paid like executives. So kind of keep that in the back of your mind. We are not engineers. We don't build anything. So then we're going to have to work with the organization's executives to help craft a security policy. What are the organization's acceptable use? What types of things need to be protected? How valuable are the assets? Whether we need physical security, network security, the application security, etc. So we're going to have to come up with a policy that's going to be organization-wide. We're going to have to come up with training needs and training plans for those organizations' people. And then we're going to have to start designing the security. What do the demilitarized zones need to look like for, say, remote access, for example? So we might actually have to look at the organization's end-to-end encryption strategy. What types of identity and access management systems is that organization using? And what do they need for their level of security? What kind of things, et cetera, et cetera. So that's just an example of some of the things we need to evaluate as the security architect. Now it's going to take a security architect to lead a team of security engineers to get deep down and dirty in the nitty gritty of these architectures. They're going to create a plan as the architect, and then they're going to have to go sell and negotiate that plan to the key stakeholders in the business. The security architect is then going to go work with multiple vendors, because it's not like we're going to just be using AWS stuff or just Azure stuff, for example. We're going to be using, say, Cisco stuff, Palo Alto stuff, Fortinet stuff. There's so many things that we need out there that we're going to be using. So we're going to have to build that team, manage those vendors, manage those key stakeholders. Then we basically have to sell the solution and make sure there's a governance structure set up and a statement of work. And then we go on to our new client, or we go into the new project, depending upon where we're working. So that's what we actually do. So if you learn offensive security, how to break into systems, and then you go in a presentation and someone says, how do I design my demilitarized zone? You're going to run into trouble. So Raz 7, if I told you the biggest issue people have when they try to become architects is they study engineering and they learn somebody else's job, and then someone asks them to design something and they know how to build it. And sadly, and I wish it wasn't true, you just can't learn how to design anything by building it. People think you can, but you can't. And that's why nobody ever hires the construction worker to design the Burj Al Arab or the Empire State Building, for example. That's an architect that designs these things. It's an engineer that actually builds these things. And if you don't believe me, Raz 7, I bet you have a PC that you use, right? I bet you use it every day, right? Tell me about your CPU. Tell me about the number of cores it has. Tell me about the level 1 cache, level 2 cache, level 3 cache. Tell me how that plus the frequency impacts its performance. While you're done that, please talk to me about the number of PCIe lanes that it has, and that pertains to how many GPUs you could put in your computer at maximum level performance, specifically, say, in an AI context. And tell me how that DRAM actually feeds things into system memory. Tell me about the NVMe, way the NVMe drives in your system are probably using. And that's really where I'm coming from. The architect needs to know all that stuff. But people that are learning the engineering will learn how to build, and it does not carry over to architecture. Let's get to the LinkedIn user that just popped in that says people say learning engineering can make someone a better architect. In case he doesn't stick around long, I want to talk about why that's not true. Okay. So LinkedIn user, I've trained people that are, say, nurses and gotten them hired as architects. And I've taken people who are engineers and made them architects. And let's talk about the difference. So I want to make this clear to you. If you wanted to be a physician, do you think going to law school would make you a better physician? Well, it might protect you from medical malpractice suits. So I guess there would be a benefit there, but it wouldn't make you a better cardiothoracic surgeon by studying law. LinkedIn user, here's what architects do. They design systems to improve their clients' business performance. Here's what engineers do. They build systems. So LinkedIn user, after training architects for over 20 years now, I can tell you that a lot of times people that have a hardcore engineering background really struggle to be architects. And I'll tell you the reason they really struggle. If you've been focused on something that's right in front of you your whole life, it is very hard to then take a big picture architecture role. And if you spent your entire life focused on the technology like an engineer does, do you know what happens when you become an architect? You still focus on the technology because it's what you know. It's not a bad thing. So what happens is if you have a better engineering knowledge, the engineers know the technology much better than an architect does. So what ultimately happens if someone has an engineering background, they have much greater technical strengths, which you would think is good, right? But here's the problem, LinkedIn user. The problem is being good at configuring technology doesn't mean you know how to design it. It's the same reason many years ago we used to promote the best engineers and made them the managers. Problem was they were horrible managers and the rest of the people on the team would quit because they were great engineers but not managers. And if you had a great engineer who was a great manager, of course they would be better. So we have to focus on what we are doing. Learning how to code will unfortunately not teach you how to design a demilitarized zone. It has nothing related to it for secure remote access. Learning how to write a Terraform script will not help you evaluate your client's weighted average cost of capital and whether you should, and how you would use that information to help them determine whether they should build a private cloud or use a public cloud. Learning how to write a Python script, which has nothing to do with what we architects do at all, will sadly not teach you how to re-architect the organization's business processes. And learning how to add a user in Linux will not teach you anything in terms of how do you lead an architecture team of 50 different architects and engineers strong. How do you respond to an RFI, RFP, RFQ? How do you sell a solution that's valued at $500 million to help the sales team? How do you negotiate the deal? So LinkedIn user, I got to tell you, I'll give you examples of people that had no architecture background, and I'll give you examples of people that I've had that had heavy-duty cloud engineering. Harsh is one of the best people I've ever met as a cloud engineer. This guy was a rock star. It took me a year to get him a cloud architect job, and it's okay. He's happy, and I got to tell you, he's great. But I'll also tell you about Ivan Tamba, who came to me fresh while he was in college. We got him hired as a solution architect by AWS, and they love him. I can tell you about Jordan Kitko, who, same thing, came to me as a college student hired by AWS as a solution architect. He's already been promoted from the last time I checked. I can tell you that Al Legister came to us, and he was a sales rep, and by the time we were done with him, he's working as a senior solution architect over at Deloitte at his first job. I can tell you about Thule, who came to me, who just got hired as a chief technology officer / lead architect last week, and it was his first job. They liked him so much. I can tell you about Wallace Agana, who did so good as an architect, they made him an enterprise architect as his first role, and his last job was in sales. So, the key is whatever you learn is what you're going to be good at. Will knowing engineering help you in some ways as an architect? Sure, it will. Would you be better served by getting a business degree and then having better business acumen and better leadership skills and better sales skills? Yeah, you really would. I have to tell you, the people that I've had the easiest time transitioning into architecture careers are medical professionals. They really are, because they've got a lot of the emotional intelligence, a lot of the sales skills, a lot of the executive presence. And it doesn't matter where you come from. Balwinder Kerr was a stay-at-home mom before we got our first cloud solution architect job at Microsoft. Jennifer Ema was a mental health tech before JP Morgan Chase hired her, and she's done real well. So that's the key. Engineering teaches you engineering. Architecture teaches you architecture. You want to be great at architecture? Learn architecture. Want to be great at engineering? Learn engineering. But I've never found that a physician becomes great by working as a nurse beforehand. I find that a physician becomes great by studying medicine, doing medicine, learning medicine, and living, eating, and breathing, sleeping medicine. So that's my perspective. And the last 20 years, I've gotten a lot of people hired. I just don't want you to think you have to take somebody else's job to ultimately 10 years later go learn your new job. Because guess what? You're going to have the same learning 10 years later as you do now.
Couldn't agree more, Mike. Freedom Lands. Do I have to take an associate certification before I can take the professional certification, Mike? And can you and I directly, can I go directly to the professional certifications?
So Freedom Lands, it depends upon the vendor. So I wanted to do a cloud certification for fun. I actually made a bet with a buddy of mine, Freedom Lands, and I said, we wrote a book on passing the AWS Solutions Architect exam. The only cloud I've never worked on was the Google Cloud. So you give me 2 days preparation, I'm going to pass the Google Professional Cloud Architect. And, you know, Google let you take that as the first exam. I took it. It was nothing exam. I passed it. It was simple. But it was only simple because I knew the cloud. I've been designing clouds for, 15 years. Actually, I've been working with different clouds since 1996. ISDN clouds, frame relay clouds, ATM clouds, BGP clouds, VPLS clouds, that sort of thing. So it depends on the vendor, and you have to check with your vendor. But in many cases, you can go straight to the professional. And if you can, I definitely would. Got questions, please ask us. We'd love to help you.
Yes, Duval, do it yourself. I'm a mechanical engineer. Thoughts on transitioning to cloud computing? I have no experience really, currently making little over 100K, but no remote work, typically with MEs.
So here's the thing. Would you like to move into cloud computing?
Yes.
If so, the answer is yes, absolutely. And I'll tell you, with the right job, you'll do far better than $100,000 a year. So the key is, what do you want to do? So when you want to move into cloud computing, the first thing we have to do is define the role. Because the way a mechanical engineer is different than an electrical engineer, all these roles in technology are very different. So let's talk about it. There are strategic planning roles like architecture roles, and there are building roles like engineers. The first thing you have to think is, do you want to be a planner or do you want to be a doer? And that's the key. So engineers are doers. And if you want to be an engineer, you're going to need a certain kind of training. If you want to be an architect, you're going to need a very different kind of training because it's a substantially different career. And then when we get to the cloud, we have to further define your career. Do you want to be a cloud engineer, which is one set of skills? Do you want to be a software developer, which is a completely different set of skills? Do you want to be a DevOps engineer, which is a different set of skills, which is different than, say, a cloud architect, which is going to be different than a security architect, which is needed on the cloud, or a cloud network architect, which is also needed on the cloud, or a data scientist, which is also a different role on the cloud, which is different than a machine learning engineer, which is different than an AI architect, which is different than a big data person, which is different than a database person. And every one of these skills are completely different. And I want to help you. So the first part is defining what you want. And then it's a matter of getting the skills. So I'll compare and contrast the skills you need for the cloud architect versus the cloud engineer. And you're going to see that these roles are so different. And that's why you've got to prepare for exactly the role you want. So here's what an architect does. They need these business skills: CXO relevancy, or the ability to be relevant to the C-suite. They need executive presence, or the ability to walk in and command a room. They need good sales skills because they're going to be constantly selling for the internal organization for resources, selling the solution to the customer, selling people who want to work on the project. They're going to need high levels of emotional intelligence because we're going to be dealing with projects that usually failed before us, and there's lots of hurt feelings and ruffled feathers, plus we have to lead teams. You will need strong leadership skills to be an architect. You will need strong knowledge of business because if we're going to design systems to optimize business performance, you clearly need to know business. Okay? So you're going to have strong presentations. Every architect interview ends in a presentation, and that's where the techies tend to fail. But we present every single day, and you're going to need to have strong writing skills. Now, our skills as the architect are knowledge of networking, specifically from a design perspective. How would you design the IP addressing plan? How would we design the routing? What wide area networking technology should we use? Like a private line versus a VPN versus a software-defined WAN. What type of, and then we need to understand compute, which is server virtualization, and container orchestration, the design, not the doing, thankfully. We don't have to touch the technology. Then we would need to understand the storage area networks like block storage, object storage, file storage, business applications, not how to code them, but how they will impact our organization's business, security, design, etc. So there are all your design type functions, APIs and how they would be designed in, etc. And if you come on Thursday, we'll give you the complete list of everything for the architect. By comparison, the engineer needs to know how to build these systems, so they need a lot of hands-on experience on how to build it at the command line, at the management console. The engineer that's going to be building these systems isn't going to be building them the way they teach you in a certification. They're typically going to be using a Terraform script, so they're going to need to understand infrastructure as code. That cloud engineer that's going to be building things and automating things needs to understand scripting. Python scripting, Bash shell scripting, Windows PowerShell scripting. That cloud engineer that's going to be building systems will be putting them on Windows or Linux, right? So they're going to have to understand Windows administration and Linux administration. So in one case, I've got an architect that needs all these executive skills plus knowledge of how the technology works and how to apply it together. And in another cases, I basically have the equivalent of a construction worker of the cloud. And if you train to be the construction worker, I promise you they will not hire you as the architect. And if you train to be the architect, you're not going to have any idea on how to do the construction. And the thing to remember, Duval DIY, is, you can spend 100 years just learning how to design and still learn every day. And if you divide your focus in learning how to design to learning how to build, for every minute you're learning how to build, which is somebody else's job, you're not getting great at your job, which is why the best architects train to be architects. And if they came from engineering, they move into architecture, they forget engineering and they start focusing on their architecture. They maintain all that they learned, but they've got a brand new focus, and that's what you can do. But, getting an architect job as a cloud architect is very simple. Average pay is around 200 right now, but there's plenty of good cloud architect jobs that pay 300, 400, 500, plenty of them. And they're not that hard to get with a couple of years experience. If you got questions, please ask them. Alonzo and I really do want to help you.
Yeah, I'm excited to answer questions. LinkedIn. Then why do HR businesses try to find someone who can design and build a solution? What's that comparison?
LinkedIn user, here's the key. 70% of all cloud architectures fail. 70%. CIO magazine said 54% were abject failures, meaning horrible. Yeah. So here's the thing. Most HR people have absolutely zero idea what we actually do. And when HR writes a job description, I got to tell you, things happen. So I actually teach my clients how to bypass HR, go straight to the recruiter, and have the recruiter actually ask the hiring manager what you want. So here's the other thing I can tell you, LinkedIn user. I've never had more than 10% of anything on an architecture skills on a job list, and I've never been hired. But I can tell you this. If you work at AWS, Azure, Cisco, IBM, Accenture, Deloitte, KPMG, Capgemini, PricewaterhouseCoopers, or anywhere else, if you try to touch the technology, in most cases, you'll be escorted out of the building by security. We are not allowed to touch our client solutions. But it all depends on the size of the organization. There are a tremendous number of engineering jobs that are masquerading as architect jobs. And LinkedIn user, I had one. There was this very famous multinational company 20-some years ago. They gave me an offer I couldn't refuse. It was so financially lucrative. It was so financially lucrative that I said, I'm going to get it. I took this job, but on the first day I went in there, they said, Michael, we know we hired you as a network architect, but we want you to go build stuff. And I said, you hired me as an architect. And they said, yeah, maybe we misled you a little bit, but, we had to call it an architect job because that's the only way they could pay what they wanted to pay for this position because they weren't allowed to pay the engineer. So we wanted somebody to design it and build it. And I said, okay, thank you very much. I walked out of the door and I took a principal 2 architect job at Comcast, the principal network architect. And it was great. And then I went into Riverstone, where of course I was an architect, where they wouldn't let me touch the technology. And then I spent a decade at Cisco, where I was not allowed to touch the technology. And every day I talk to one of my students that's been hired and they say no. You could also look at some videos that David Lithicum and I did. David was the chief architect for all of Deloitte. And he talks about, of course, architects do not configure things. So, I've seen some wacky job descriptions. Truth be told, my buddies and I, LinkedIn user, we used to get together, I'd say once every month, sometimes once every 3 months. We would all at our houses, especially during COVID, have a bottle of Macallan 25, pour a shot, and we'd go over these job descriptions that we'd see on the HR web pages and use it as a common routine. And I'd say, hey, anybody that does that? And they'd say no. And we'd have a little bit of a sip. And it was a lot of fun, I got to tell you. I can't go more than 2 shots of scotch because it makes me drunk. I'm a lightweight and I don't drink a lot. But it was a really fun game. So here's what ultimately happened is, after these ridiculous, silly job descriptions, Gartner started asking employers, what do you want in a cloud architect? And Tyrone, if you're there, please drop a link to the magazine. Anyway, it was published in CIO magazine. And here is what the chief information officers, who are our bosses as cloud architects, told Gartner, which is published in CIO magazine. They said, I would like a cloud architect to lead the cultural change for cloud adoption, develop, which means design, and coordinate a cloud architecture, and develop a cloud strategy and coordinate the adoption process. That statement of work that we have to write. Help find talent with the necessary skills, assess applications, software and hardware, like how are they performing, etc. Creating a cloud broker team, establishing best practices for cloud across the company, selecting cloud providers and vetting third-party services, overseeing governance and mitigating risk, working closely with IT security to monitor privacy and develop incident response procedures, manage budgets and estimate cost, and operate at scale. There's no code there. There's no configure there. And this is what management is asking for you. And I can tell you, LinkedIn user, I've had someone, I think his name was Arun. He was a really technical guy, but he was working at Home Depot. He had all these little sysops and DevOps, all this coding stuff on his resume. And he's Mike, I don't understand. I keep getting called by recruiters who keep asking me about this techie stuff. I said, Arun, it's Thursday. Can I dedicate the entire class to taking your resume and fixing it for everyone else to see? And everyone's like, I don't care, Mike, do whatever you want. So we took his class. We got rid of the AWS DevOps cert, the SysOps cert, the developer cert. We got rid of a lot of the coding and configuring. We talked about what all the things that he did that were related to business leadership, sales. He had multiple offers within a few weeks because he had the skills. He just needed the right interview. So, I've never had more than 10% of the skills in a job description, but don't ever expect job descriptions to be accurate. There's an exceptional video that we made, and the woman that made the video with me, Christina Marino, she's the CEO of this national IT recruiting firm. I mean, she's the best of the best over at IT Excel. She's placed me and so many of my clients over the years in roles. And we asked her, why do you see this silliness in a job description? And she says, look, we're trying to cast a big note to get anybody that we think we might want to interview. So by the time we're done with this, we go through these things, we might find somebody that can actually do the job. Pretty good video. You should see it. It's on our YouTube channel. I like to interview CEOs periodically, healthcare leaders, etc. And hope that helps.
Diggleman, I've had companies reach out regarding security architect roles recently, Mike. I want to progress a bit more into the program. First, once I feel ready, should I wait until I get my CASSP to interview?
So, Dingleman, I know you and you know how fondly I think of you. Here's the thing. Right now, you came to us, you worked with us, and you got a pretty serious security job at one of the largest security vendors in the entire world. So, Dingleman, you're doing pretty great.
Yeah.
Why do I say this? Well, first, you got the right personality, you've got the right education, you've got the right training, and the right knowledge. So if you can go and move up into a security architect role before you get the certification, move up into it. Remember, the whole point of a certification, Dingleman, is to build your brand and get you an interview. So if you can get there, do it. In fact, Dingleman, I'll actually tell you, I had a very similar experience. So we all know that, internal medicine was my background, Dingleman, as ridiculous as that sounds. I was also getting an MBA at Drexel University around the time I moved into tech. And I had a tech offer from MCI WorldCom that was so good. And that offer was, in Piscataway, New Jersey. Drexel was in Philadelphia. There was no way that in those days I would have had the time to finish my CCIE, take the job over at WorldCom, and still finish my MBA that I actually, Dingleman, took the job. It paid more than any of Drexel's MBA graduates were getting in those days by probably 50% more. So I figured, ding, 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 I wouldn't get this good getting out of school. I got to take the job. This is a win. Now, I got to tell you, Dingleman, I felt bad about not finishing my MBA. So probably 5-6 years later, no, it was about longer than that, maybe 8 or 9 years later when I worked at Cisco, I had Cisco send me to an MBA program. They paid for it with a lot of other things. And I did my MBA when I was ready for it, learned it, and loved it. But the point is, I got that great job. I earned that great money all of those years with or without it. So with your skill, if you can get a great job, Dingleman, go out there and get that great job.
Yeah.
Earn that even bigger paycheck. Get more respect. Get a job you love more. Get that back. And then you'll be in good shape. So if it happens to be the CISSP that you get first, great. If it happens to be you got hired first, great. For most part, I do certifications as bait to get you the interview. So if you're getting the interviews because of where you work, and then when you get the interviews, not because of where you work, but you prove to them that you've got the knowledge, interview plus interview training plus interview preparation plus the right skills equals success. So I think you're doing great, Dingleman.
Right. And then on top of where you're working, that name brand alone is commanding a lot of attention for you. And like you said, Mike shared with us for the audience that we know you, we know your intelligence, your capability, your ability to converse, deliver ideas, and so forth. I think you're going to be in a great space. And then on top of that, I'm pretty sure that they're going to be willing to pay for a CISSP anyway. Okay. So you're going to be winning across the board. Aaron, I'm a disabled vet looking to upgrade my career. I'm working everywhere from IT to support to deputy CIO, and I am very interested in transitioning to an architect career. But am I overwhelmed? Advice.
So Aaron, first, thank you for your service, and I'm sorry to hear about your disability. I honestly can relate to you. I had a training accident doing some type of a sport training, and it took me about 7 years to be able to walk again after that injury. So I understand all those things that you go through, Aaron. The key is you can be anything you want. And typically speaking, when I have a veteran, I have someone that understands how to take directions, someone that knows to pay attention to detail, and someone that won't quit until they win. So, as a special forces friend of mine said to me one day, they said, if you have to eat an elephant, you do it one bite at a time, and then you don't get overwhelmed. So, Aaron, let's talk about the key is what you need to do. If you want to be an architect, great. Get training. If you'd like to train with us, I always have something worked out very special for veterans because I'm always grateful for your service. And if so, send an email to info@gocloudcareers.net. So keep that in the back of your mind. The next thing that I want to tell you is we've got to break it down. You will need business skills. Have to have them. You will need leadership skills. Have to have them. You will need sales skills. You must have them. You're going to have to understand all of those executive things and business relevancy. And if you got that, and maybe you've got it from another career that you actually have. And if you have them, great. If not, you're going to need to get them. You can get them from us. So every one of our training programs has it. You could go to a business school, take some leadership training, take some presentation skills training. However you want to get it, it's fine. And I want you to download the completely free guide that we wrote for you and come to the completely free webinar on Thursday. I will literally list every single skill that you need, and it's also in that book, and I will happily answer your questions. And you can ask us any questions face-to-face on Zoom, and me and my team will do anything we can to assist you. So then it's about learning the technology. If you want to be an architect, you have to remember it's not about how to. It's about how to design. So it's very different to design a system than it actually is to build a system. For example, I don't know your position in the military, but let's say we have a sniper. What makes a sniper special is they can get in and get out, and they can do the calculations. Pulling that trigger, not that big of a deal, but being able to calculate the wind, the direction of the wind, the angle of the wind, the elevation, the temperature, the humidity, bullet flight time and the way the rifle would be spinning maybe to the right, and which would be called spin drift. I worked with a lot of people and helped coach them and performance coach them, and they were trying to describe the system. But you see all these kind of things. The actual calculations, the trajectory, that's the more complicated thing. They have to plan it. So you take a military person, they have to do a lot of planning and what goes into things. They just trained it so much that it's second nature to them. But the architect would be more like the planner of what that would occur. Or the spotter that might say, add 2 mils elevation, for example, or something to that effect. The planner, not the doer. So that's the key, is the architect. I put it in more military context terms for you because I'm very grateful for your service. But that's what we need to think about. So architect is planning. So the architect is how every component works. How does the storage work? How do we integrate storage into the virtual machines? Storage into the containers, for example. That's more of the planning that we would need to do. Okay, an organization needs a database. What are they trying to store? What are the needs? How big is it going to have to be? And then taking that needs and knowledge to figuring out something that would be good for them. We're not creating tables and databases, for example. We're not playing with columns and rows or doing any of that. We're not running SQL queries, but we would need to know. Now, how do we scale that database? How do we improve its performance? How do we? So realistically speaking, please download that list, and I don't want it to be overwhelming, but understand it's a planning career. Very similar to mission planning. The people that plan the mission often are not on the battlefield themselves. And honestly, you have to have like a CENTCOM or a central command, and they can't be on the battlefield because you need them to see the big picture vision of what's going on globally. And that's the same thing that the architect does. You have to look at it that way. So join us on the webinar. If you'd like to train with us, great. We'll find something. We have a special program for veterans. If you don't, I just want you to know what to do. And I really, really, really want to thank you for your service. If you've got questions, please answer them. Alonzo and I love to help people.
Yes. Rando, are you selling the entire architecture as an all or none, or what the company is willing to take on?
So Rando, it depends on the architecture. If you're a security architect, you might be doing a mini architecture for a new demilitarized zone, or one little mini architecture for remote access. If you're going to deal with a cloud migration, you could end up be doing anything. So it's really going to depend on what kind of an architect you have. So while we're at it, Rando, let's talk about architecture roles and architect pay and how you can build and plan your architecture career. Because this is something most people don't talk about, and it's true. And most people really shoot themselves in the foot as it pertains to the career. So I'm going to give you the dirty little secret of technology. The closer you are to the business, the more you will earn. The closer you are to technology, the less you will earn. Now that sounds counterintuitive. So let's talk about the types of architectural roles and what each architect does. So we know we have the engineers that build it. Now, engineers have an engineering pay. Right above engineering pay grade, we have something called a technical architect. And here's what a technical architect is. They're an engineer with a fancy title, but the technical architect is a very accomplished technology professional. They're typically an engineer with a lot of experience. That technical architect might touch the technology, they might configure it. Sadly, they're the least paid of the architects. They're paid a little more than the engineer, and they typically focus on technology just like the architects. And the architects like me, the more executive architects, will go to those technical architects and say, hey, any technical guidance on this? And they could be a resource to us, like our pseudo engineers, if you will. So that's your technical architects. You got your engineer, then you got your technical architect. When we abstract a level above that, we typically have something called a solutions architect. And what a solutions architect is, somebody that works for a company like Cisco or IBM or NVIDIA or Azure that functions, typically speaking, as a pre-sales representative of that organization that will design, present, and they're part of the sales team, sell an architecture to an end client. So they're going to focus typically as close as possible to single vendor. If you're a solutions architect at Cisco, you're going to try and use as much Cisco stuff as you can in your architecture, let alone Cisco competitors. If you work for AWS as a solution architect and you're getting paid by AWS, you're going to try and sell as much AWS stuff in your architecture because they work for a company. So solutions architect is typically single vendor working for a vendor. And they earn more than the technical architects, but typically less than you would as a more cloud architect. And here's the reason why. Now, the cloud architect is going to be doing all the clouds. So the AWS cloud, the Google cloud, the Oracle cloud, the Azure cloud. Plus, they're also going to be dealing with the private clouds like VMware, OpenStack, or Nutanix. They're going to be creating all these architectures. Now, imagine you're dealing with every network data center and cloud that's out there. Now, you're going to have to be a little higher level, closer to the business. Your focus becomes much more strategic. You're not going to be thinking about API limitations on Azure. You got somebody, a solution architect at Azure that can be that expert that can consult to you. You're focused on the end-to-end strategy. So you're going to earn a little more. And now, so the technical architect's going to be focusing on that tactical, say, demilitarized zone. That solutions architect could be focused either on something technical or something bigger. That cloud architect, for the most part, is going to be focusing on something big because they're now dealing with multi-cloud architectures, and they're going to be big changes in the organization. Then we're going to move up a level, and we're going to get into the enterprise architecture. Now you got an enterprise architect that has to be thinking about what the security architects are thinking about, what the network architects are thinking about, what the IM architects are thinking about, what the AI architects are thinking about, the cloud architect, solutions architect. So pretty much that enterprise architect becomes much more of a management leadership role of all of them. And hence, we can see some incredibly high chief architect $1 million salaries, which are really enterprise architects with a different name. So that's kind of it. So it's going to depend on your architecture role. If you work with a small business, like the small business startup advisors that Amazon has, that's going to be all small stuff and typically a little, what they would call a pots and pans in the tech industry, where it's a little this and a little this. And all those little things add up to a lot. If you're working as an architect on a more strategic account, the kind that the principal architects would work on, the big deals, they're going to be dealing with all kinds of architectures. So one piece of technology will affect the way that people work. It will affect the way the customers shop, and it can do everything. So as you move up in the architecture's roles, it's going to be bigger, 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 and bigger. I typically don't do any architecture and haven't done in a long time that's not at least $500 million and doesn't take at least 15 to 50 people 6 months to a year to actually design it. But other architects might be working on things that are smaller. I started out smaller. I just moved into bigger as my skill went up and as people wanted me to do more strategic things, and I was thrilled to do it. It's a great job, Rando.
Great explanation. Freedom Lands. Mike and Alonzo, how do you improve our leadership skills? Mike, please feel free to go first.
So you have to learn how to be a leader. Look, some people just know what to do. Every once in a while, you meet someone and everybody just looks up to them and everybody just follows them. They're natural leaders. Now, you take a natural leader and then you coach them, and then true magic comes. But you don't have to be a natural leader to learn how to lead. You can be an introvert. I'm an introvert. Yeah, you wouldn't want to believe it, but yes, I'm an introvert. I actually did naturally having people follow me, but I took a lot of leadership training, and I mean years. So how do you improve them? Well, you have to learn there's various leadership styles, and you have to learn the styles that are out there and how and when you would use them. For example, I know Alonzo. He and I have a level of friendship that would be hard to describe for the average person. If I said, Alonzo, I need you to meet me at XYZ coordinates at this time, I'm pretty much sure that he'd say, okay, Mike, and he would just do it. Like, he wouldn't think about it. He wouldn't be offended. He knows me, and I could do that. I wouldn't do that. I'd call Alonzo and say, hey, Alonzo, what are you doing? You think you could meet me over here? But if I did it, it would be okay. Now, if it's an emergency, like, hey, there's a fire, Alonzo, you get out of that room right now. He'd be okay with it. He'd be thankful. So, there's two different strategies that you can use. So you have to learn the leadership styles and when to apply each. In an emergency situation, like in the military, command and control is appropriate. And it's probably the most sacred thing. If you don't follow orders, somebody's going to die. So they need to do that. Now, in a medical office, that's not going to really work. In a big business where you've got 100,000 employees and you got people that are sensitive to everything, you need more sensitive styles of leadership. So you need to understand leadership. I will also tell you, Freedom Lance, studying psychology and sociology is important. Understanding what's normal patterns of behavior for people, what's not normal patterns of behavior of people, how people interact in groups versus how people interact on their own. And if you understand people, then you understand exactly how to be a better leader. Part of it is working on your emotional intelligence. People at the ultimate day, Freedom Lands, remember how you made them feel. They forget almost everything else, but they remember how you made them feel. So, what are you doing to bring out the best in others and make others feel good and leave a good taste in their mouth? So that's part of your communication skills, your leadership skills. Now, to be a good leader, you can't be offending things. So many years ago, my wife used to convince me to watch soap operas with her. I think it was Days of Our Lives. And I love my wife. She's incredible. She's put up with me for nearly 30 years now. So she said she wants to watch this. I put the cat on my lap and I watched TV. I was watching Days of Our Lives with my wife. And I noticed that in all these TV shows, everybody's arguing with everybody because they're not communicating whatever their things is. So in order to be a good leader, you've got to communicate because you've got to be able to have the conversations you need, which may include difficult conversations. So you need a soft touch and a lot of finesse. And I'll tell you, Freedom Lambs, there's 4 or 5 different personality types. And if you can learn those 4 or 5 different personality types, you'll be better equipped to be able to see people, recognize them for who they are. But the rest of it is, I try not to ask anybody to do anything that I'm not willing to do. Actually, I never do that. If it's something really bad, really nasty, Freedom Lands, I'll do it as opposed to asking one of my members of my team to do it because I don't really like to delegate the geeky, gritty stuff out there unless I have no choice. And if you don't ask people to do things that you wouldn't do yourself, and they know that, they're much more likely to follow you. And, the last thing is, as a good leader, you got to focus on people's first safety and security. You have to make sure that they feel safe and know they are safe. And when things go wrong, you got to fix it. I remember in one of my first jobs, HR made an error, and it took like 6 weeks to get it fixed. By the time the 6 weeks to get that error truly fixed, I already had another job offer, and I was thinking, do I want to stay at this company because they don't seem to have any urgency? So I'd say those are a lot of the components, but I summarized a lot in a short period of time. So please feel free to ask more questions. I'd love to answer them.
Absolutely. Always lead from the front, okay? Set the examples. Be the one that everyone is comfortable speaking to, because one of the things that I've learned is that I've been able to strengthen my career moving forward when I'm able to talk to my leader, when I'm able to share what's frustrating me, be able to be honest about what I want to do or where I want to go in my prior positions, and being able to be coachable or be able to provide an aspect of some skills that are going to help your junior team leaders to be the best that they can be. So we could go on and on. That could possibly that would be a whole different conversation about leadership. But overall, do the things that we recommend, lead from the front, be that team leader that everyone can go to, and just be an overall people person to gauge how people are moving forward in their day-to-day lives and how you can enhance their experiences. LinkedIn user again. How do I transition from InfoSec analyst to enterprise architecture? I've been studying project management and Scrum to build up how to talk to the business.
Okay, LinkedIn user, please stop studying Scrum. Please stop studying project management. It has honestly nothing to do with what we do as enterprise architects. Here's what you need to do. So the first thing you need is business knowledge. And I've got an enterprise architect program where we teach this business knowledge, but you need to understand business. Your whole job as an enterprise architect is to design a system to optimize business performance. So how you need to understand business. So when you look at a balance sheet, what is it telling you, LinkedIn user? When you look at a financial statement, what is it telling you? If you look at what the industry analysts are telling you about a company, what is it telling you? When you look at an organization's revenue and then you look at its operational expenses, what do you need to do? How to tune that? For example, If I've got an organization that's got 18,000 back-end software engineers, how many of those software engineers will we not need if we leverage generative AI? Could we get rid of 6,000 of the 18,000 to generate basic code as an architect, for example? And the answer is yes, you could. Now you'll need the better ones, but you might be able to lose them. So what is the cost of the generative AI systems versus what is the cost of the people's salary? What is your return on investment capital that you're going to get? So these are architect things. So Lincoln users. So now you're dealing with an airline. Actually, no. Now you're dealing with a technology company that imports things from China. There was a new legal change that occurred a week ago that now means that new imports from China are going to be taxed or tariffed an additional 20%. That's going to make things 20% more expensive for the organizations that import their things from China. Now, that organization now has to contend with higher costs. So what does that organization do? Do they have the price elasticity to raise their prices? If so, great. If that organization can raise their prices part of the cost, but not, do they have to reduce their staff? Or could we do something with technology that could cut their costs? For example, if an organization does forecasting, could we create or hire the right people to generate an AI system that could make better forecasts so that organization could purchase what they need when they need it and have less, say, inventory spoilage? So these are the kind of business things that we're talking about. Project management is basically a techie role. Alonzo, you do this. Did you do it, Alonzo? Okay, great. Sally, did you do this? Yes, I did. Nothing to do with enterprise architecture. Enterprise architecture is big strategy management consulting work. So you could get an MBA. That would be one way to prepare. Another way is you could take our training program. Now, in my work as an enterprise architect, I'll tell you what I did LinkedIn user. And my background is internal medicine, which honestly taught me architecture, because what do we do in medicine is we deal with the patient, we figure out what their problem is, we create a plan for them, and somebody else carries out the plan, just like an architect. So I had that. But I also have a CCIE, had a CISSP. The CCIE, I learned a lot about engineering, not so much architecture, but I had that techie engineering background. And then I decided I wanted to be an enterprise architect. So sadly, I took the CCIE off of my resume. I took the CISSP and the CCNP and the CCDP off of my resume. I got an MBA. My company sent me to leadership training, sales training, executive presence training, emotional intelligence training, solving difficult conversations, you name it, training for this. They hired me an executive coach. And a couple of years later, I was working as an enterprise architect. So that's why I created an enterprise architect program, because I know most people don't have, the $200,000-$300,000 to learn those kind of skills for a job that pays this. But having said all of this, the key is if you learn those business skills and you get those good leadership skills and you understand how to understand an organization's financial challenges, you'll be in a position to truly help your clients be very good. So if you want to get it from us, we'd love to train you. You want to go to a business school? Great. And the key is we're looking for paper, but I need you to understand accounting. I need you to be able to understand finance. I need you to be able to walk into a client, and when the cloud provider says we're 3 times cheaper, and you look at that organization's cost of capital, and you look at their financing costs versus to buy it versus their renting cost, and then you can evaluate their operational cost, you can give the client something real. Most cloud migrations have costed 2.5 times more than they used to cost in the data center. And that's because the initial architects just didn't have this business acumen. And what happens, you get a design and the tech works. That's easy because we've got lots of smart engineers, but we need that strategic planner to go in between those business needs and there. So you can definitely do it. I'm going to invite you on Thursday on our Cloud Architect webinar. And I'd be more than honored. We'll ultimately talk for about 30 minutes or so, maybe 40 minutes. And you can ask me any enterprise architect things. I'll even give you a mini quiz and assess you if you want to come off mute. I really want to help you get to your goals. The enterprise architecture job is just fantastic. I absolutely love it. It's my favorite of all the architect roles. Now, there's a lot of great roles. The cloud architect role is awesome. The network architecture role is awesome. The security architect role is awesome. The AI architect role is probably the most strategic and highest paying role out there right now. And of course, with David Lithicum, we teach it. But personally, Being a network architect, I get to be geeky. Being an enterprise architect, I get to be a business executive, and I like a little of both. Please feel free to ask questions. We do want to assist you.
Definitely. Silent poet. If we are trying to be relevant to the C-suite, how do we do that? Like if we just can't look at a business and see how I could come across as an asset as a security architect.
So silence poet, I'll give you some examples. So here's how you become an engineer. You talk about the AWS most recent feature. Or you look like an engineer, you talk about the new Palo Alto box that can push this much with layer 7 filtering. That's engineering. And that doesn't look C-suite relevant at all. It's discussing speeds and feeds. And guess what? There's a time and a place for that, but not you as the architect. So what you might do is if you're going to create content, you really might look at, the generative AI tools that are out there and how could they be used to create new types of attacks. And you might talk about that. And you might talk about the risk posed by these types of attacks to certain organizations and talk about it. Silence poet, you might talk about the unseen hidden cost that not all organizations realize. And you might talk about the cost of of a data breach, where if a person's information is compromised, it can cost between $125 and $200 per person that you have to notify. So you can start talking about the hidden risk. Organizations that have 200,000 employees could potentially be exposed up to this. Then you could calculate some expected value type calculations on this. Like if you see there's a $2 billion risk and a likelihood of happening 10% per year, because you got to get those statistics somewhere and they got to be real statistics, you could show, say, a $200 million exposure per year. And if you knew that, then the organization from a business perspective could talk about, do they spend $10 million and mitigate these risks with the right firewalls, or do they spend $15 million on insurance to transfer the risk to somebody else, or what have you? But that's the key point. And I gave you some goofy numbers there because I'm making them up as I go along, but you'd have to do those things. You might also talk as a security architect of why zero trust is not the be all and end all, why we need zero trust and defense in depth, and what that can do to increase an organization's availability and protect them from unnecessary risk. You might talk about emerging risks and how they can affect business operations. So you've always got to bring it back to the business. What is the financial metrics to that business? Because here's the thing. Nobody cares about stuff unless they know what it can actually hurt them. And it's, silence poet, I kind of learned this when I used to practice internal medicine in my youth. And I would deal with someone and I'm like, I want to get your blood sugar down a couple of points. I want you to stop smoking. They're young. They were healthy. They didn't care. Then their father would get a heart attack from smoking and they'd come in, Mike, I got to get healthy. What do I need to do? Because they felt the risk. No, I don't want anybody ever having a heart attack. I don't want anybody ever getting sick. But that taught me a big lesson. And one of the reasons organizations don't spend enough to protect themselves against the risk is they don't truly understand the risk. So what are those risks? What are those alligators that are out there that are going to get the business? What is the cost on average to a business of these type of risks? And what can you do, or what can you design to go mitigate these risks in a matter where if I've got an asset that's worth $1 billion and my annual exposure is $200 million, what can you do for $50 million to go cut that risk? Because you can tell you what, you're going to protect that for a small amount. And that's where you're really talking about. How do you impact the business? What is the cost of downtime for that business? Maybe build a downtime calculator. I built the downtime calculator as an architect of security. And we calculated per minute of downtime what it would cost various businesses based on their numbers. You might find a business loses $1 million a minute being down. And if they're hacked and they're down for 8 hours, that's going to cost a lot for a company that earns $1 million a minute. So it's all about understanding the numbers, understanding the metrics, and being able to relate to the executive the quantitative risks and what they're exposed to, but also the qualitative risks. What will happen to the organization's brand? And you can semi-quantify that. What will happen to public perception in that organization's brand? How will that affect sales? When you start talking about those things, you're now communicating as an actual security architect as opposed to a security engineer talking about the speeds and feeds or the new feature reduced by the cloud provider or the security provider. Hope that helps, Silent silence poet. Please ask more. I really want to help.
Roz, any suggestion for projects, portfolio items that would demonstrate architectural abilities and skills, Mike?
Sure, Raz. So the last thing I want to see for an architect is someone that's talked about building WordPress websites, configuring Linux things, because you're telling me you know how to do somebody else's job. So imagine you wanted to be an airplane pilot, and instead of coming to me with a flight log and your pilot certification, you told me that you had 15 years as a flight attendant. Well, guess what? Flight attendants do something very important. They keep people safe in their destination, in their seats, and safe. Critical position, but if you showed me that you've been a flight attendant for 15 years, I'm not likely to hire you as a pilot unless you can show me you've got a pilot license and you know how to be a pilot. And I wouldn't be more likely to hire you because you were a flight attendant. I'd be more likely to hire you if you got in the Navy as a pilot and all of a sudden got a flight license and you're a pilot. But, keep that in the back of your mind. So what do architects do in their jobs? They design systems, they write thought leadership papers, they write white papers to assist in sales, they respond to RFIs, RFPs, RFQs, they create architecture documents. And these architecture documents talk about, how they solve a business problem, what the workflow would be, what the user flow would be. Those would be the things that you would create as an architecture project, showing that you, in fact, can do things. So that's what I would do. That's the real key. It's called specificity of training. So for a couple of years, unfortunately, I was unable to walk after an injury. And, I was doing about 7 hours of physical therapy per day. I was hiring professional strength and conditioning specialists, the CSCS people that were working with pro athletes. I was going to do anything so I could be able to walk again. And when I took that CSCS strength coach certification, and I did it myself, and believe me, it was pretty rough. And, you needed a 4-year degree, you needed a PT degree or this degree or a medical degree to even sit for this exam. They're the people that work with the pro athletes in the NFL or an athletic training background or PT or something big. And when they talked about it, they talked about, what's different about us and training pro athletes and training the most high performance people in the world is specificity of training. So for example, if you're going to train an Olympic gymnast, what do? You look at their power, their speed, their agility needs. You look at what strength to weight ratios they need to be able to move the way they need to. You would look at the mobility needs they need to be able to get into, and you would look at the energy systems used in that sport. And you would build a plan for that gymnast to make them better at gymnastics. Now, that gymnast plan, if you applied it to a marathon runner, would be a disaster because the marathon runner would bulk up, probably gain 20 pounds of muscle. They'd lose their cardio, and they'd be very powerful and very agile, but a horrible runner. And the key is in professional sports, we do specificity of training. Well, in the way I coach people in their careers, I get very specific to exact their condition. When I practice medicine, I wrote the right prescription for their condition, not somebody else's. So these are the kind of projects: thought leadership, presentations, business cases, RFP responses, for example, statements of work, document on how to optimize business performance. Thought leadership, that is architecture work. So that's your specific bait to go out there and do it. I have my students doing all kinds of specific projects, helping me co-author books from time to time, helping me co-author training courses from time to time, going out there and talking about their special skills. So build those things that demonstrate you for being you. The world will see you. Make sure you've got the real talent. And when you got exposure and talent, it's when you've got like preparation and opportunity. That's what I consider luck. If you are not prepared, it doesn't matter if you get the best interview. But if you are properly prepared, and I mean with all the skills, business skills, tech skills, and of course interview skills, and now you've got an interview, there's no reason you shouldn't get it. Round 7, I've never been on an interview where I didn't get a job. And truthfully, on 2 of the 5 jobs that I chose to take, I got better jobs than the one I interviewed for because I was prepared for them. And I got to tell you, before an interview, I would spend 40 to 80 hours preparing for it because I truly believe that proper preparation prevents something poor performance. So go out there and win.
Great example, Mike. We use that a lot. From Chi. Not getting job interviews, just a bunch of recruiters calling and telling you to sign a RTR. After signing, you never hear back from them. What do you think is missing?
So, Chia, I don't know what you mean by a right to represent. I've worked with lots of recruiters, and I've never signed something like that in my entire life. That would terrify me if they're asking to do something like that with you. So please keep that in the back of your mind. So typically speaking, there's a good video, Chia, I'd like you to see. There's basically 3 levels of recruiters that actually exist. There's the people that collect resumes, that honestly call themselves recruiters, that have very little to do with it. They're just like resume catchers. They're going to collect your resume and basically just send it into their company if it's good. Then you've actually got some recruiters, and you've got some closing recruiters that actually help negotiate the things on yourself. So there's 3 sides of that recruiting industry. So typically speaking, if you get a bunch of people that just reach out to you, they ask you to send them a resume and you don't hear back, it's because they're possibly collecting resumes and using them for a time in the future when they think they may have an opportunity. And some of these postings are not even the right type of, are not even for real jobs. Kind of like when a realtor sells a house, but they leave the house posted on homes.com and realtor.com for 2 to 3 extra weeks in order to do it, to try and collect names that they can talk to. So there's that. Now, the second side of it is your resume could not be so good. It might be just enough to get the recruiters to be interested in you, but when they try to present it to an employer or look at it by the more senior resumes, they are not interested. So that could be there. So I'd ask you this on your resume: is your grammar perfect? Is your spelling perfect? Are your sentences typically 11 words or less, or are they rambling? Are the bullet points on your item relevant to what you do? Because, for example, if I had an architect and they said deployed infrastructure as code, wrote Python scripts, and I'd say they're not an architect, then I would toss that resume aside. Now, if I had a resume of an architect that talked about responding to RFIs, RFPs, RFQs, facilitating meetings, giving large-scale presentations, leading architectural review boards, negotiating deals, writing thought leadership documents, I'd say, oh, that person looks like an actual architect. So I don't know what's on your resume. And I also don't know which job you want. So I'm kind of shooting blind here. But I will tell you, and if you want us to give you more information, we're going to have that. But is everything on your resume congruent? When I look at resumes, and I look at probably hundreds a week that I look at, usually they've got the wrong skills on them per the position. A lot of times they're things that are taken out of context. So, for example, I see a lot of what I call fake resumes. Someone's got a cloud architect job and it's filled with cloud engineer work, and I know the company and I know that's not what they do. I know it's fake. Or, for example, someone talks about leveraging virtual machines in their microservices application, and they're not talking about that it's housing containers. I know it's not real. So it's those kinds of things. And typically speaking, a lot of resumes don't feel real. So it could be that. And I'm not saying it is that. There could be grammar errors, and then maybe there aren't, maybe they're not. I look at resumes every day, and I'll tell you about 95% of them have grammar errors. I look at resumes every day, and I will tell you 95% of them are so wordy and run on sentences, even if they have commas and colons, that nobody's going to read them. I'm curious about the executive summary on your resume. Does it entice the reader? I'm curious about all of what it looks like. So, and by resume, I also mean LinkedIn profile. Chris, we can bring in the next question.
Freedom Lands again. I understand the difference between solution architect and cloud architect, but I want to know if cloud architects work with solution architects when the cloud architect is doing a cloud architecture.
So Freedom Lands, yeah, we will have to work with solutions architects. So let's say right now, I just became a cloud architect for JP Chase, right? I just picked a name out of random. Why did I pick that name? Because we have Wallace Agana working there, who we trained Daniel Bosu, who worked there. We trained Jennifer Ema, who worked there. We've trained so many people, and they worked at JP Chase, and it's a great bet. So let's say I'm a cloud architect at a JP Chase. Might I be using OpenStack? Might I be using AWS? Might I be using Azure? The answer is probably yeah. So under those circumstances, if I'm the cloud architect working for JP Chase, can I ever know AWS's stuff as good as the people that work at AWS? No. And I don't care if you go out there and get 800 AWS certifications. You will still never know the inner workings of the AWS product set like you work at AWS. And here's the reason why. They don't publish the inner workings of the things that are very important. And the only way you will get to know there is by working at these companies. So now I would be a cloud architect. I'd be at JP Morgan Chase. I'm going to want to design. I'm going to want to bring in AWS for them to help coach me and help do parts of the design on their AWS stuff. And I'm going to check it with my team to make sure they didn't get, there's not too much of the stuff. I'm going to consult with Azure. I'm going to consult with OpenStack. I'm going to consult with all those solutions architects, because if I've got to know an entire business and all of its systems, I can't know Cisco things as good as the people that work for Cisco. Now, Freedom Lands, I didn't know this. Early in my career, I became a CCIE. Miserable exam. I mean, miserable, hardest certification in the world. And I can tell you, it took about 1,000 pages of reading pretty much every day for 6 months. Well, actually, no, because I read the stuff twice. So I'd say 75,000 pages of reading, to be fair, is really what it was. But I thought I knew Cisco stuff. And then I got my first really senior high-level network architect job. And I called Cisco, and they said, well, the reason it's not working is the backplane of the box can only support this many packets. I'm like, where was this in your documentation? Where was this in the CCI? And they said, oh, well, we don't publish those numbers. Okay. Or this is a new bug that we just found. I'm like, well, how was I supposed to know? Well, you didn't know. You didn't ask. Like, okay. Somebody designed it before I got there. So there was that. And then when I got to Cisco and I had all this inner workings and I got to work with more strategic clients, it was like, well, they knew to call us to help with the design. And we'd say, well, this is the right box, but no, right now we're going to replace it with this because given this, it's going to be right for you. So it's going to be that way at Cisco, AWS, and Azure. So if I'm a good architect, I'm not going to have an ego. I'm not going to be afraid to get help. And I'm going to bring in solutions architects from the cloud providers. And of course, they're going to work with my architects in the background. And we're going to be working together and helping each other out. Because I'm also going to have to be dealing with security people. You think I'm going to have security and just do it on AWS? No. I'm going to need enterprise grade security. So that means I'm going to need firewalls from like a Cisco or a Checkpoint or a Palo Alto or a Fortinet. They're your primary firewall builders and designers that are out there in this world. I'm going to need some type of, token device, typically speaking, and there's certain vendors for that. So keep in mind that we're always going to be working as cloud architects with various solutions architects, and they're going to be working for the various vendors out there, and they're going to have much better information about their stuff than we will, because we don't work there, and they can't publish the inner workings of certain things. Great question, Freedom Labs.
Another question from Freedom Lands. If you pick the wrong employer, Mike, how do you exit and still keep a positive reputation? What's the proper way to quit an employer for a better one?
Well, Freedom Lands, let's talk about a few things. Let's talk about the reality. When you leave an employer, no matter what you do, they're going to be upset with you. They're just going to be. And the reality is, if it's a great employer, they've probably put a lot of time, effort, and money into your development. So keep that in the back of your mind. They're never going to be happy. But how do you separate as clean as possible, as gently as possible, and still keep your reputation? The first thing you do is you have an emotionally intelligent conversation with your manager. And you let them know why you are leaving. That for some reason you have this new opportunity, and this new opportunity is going to take you to your end goals. You're very grateful for the support they've given you. They're very grateful for the opportunity you're given. And you hope your paths will cross at some point in the future. But you have to take this for whatever reason. You also give them plenty of time to transition you out. I can give you 2 weeks. I can give you 3 or 4 weeks. And there's that. Now, when you transition out, how you transition out? Do you give that employer, peak effort until your last day? Do you go out there and train your replacements? Do you go out there and speak kindly of all the people you did, but tell your coworkers that you had this opportunity that was so good, but you couldn't pass up on it? Or do you tell people, I didn't like my manager, and that'll get back to your manager, and that will damage things? So the degree of class and decorum that you carry yourself with is going to be there. You make sure that you know your manager, and you might cross paths. If he ever needs some help or wants to come where you're at, keep you in mind in the future. And you go to the new place and you do a good job. And when you get to the new place, if they ask you anything about your old company, oh, honestly, it was a great place, but I've always wanted to work for you for X, Y, Z reason, but never speak negatively. And always do right by your employer. And when you leave, I remember I worked at one place. I went to a new company and they're like, okay, what are your old company's weaknesses? I'm like, huh? They're like, we're competing against them. I said, well, first, it's not fair, it's not ethical, and it's not right. I said, secondly, if that didn't work, I signed an NDA. But, I have to carry myself with a certain level of this. And, in the end of the day, here's the thing. Those people that were angry at me for 15 minutes for having ethics and not violating them, 6 months later, they had a lot of trust and a lot of respect for me because I had ethics and professionalism. So, there is that. So treat everyone with class. Leave a good taste in everyone's mouth. Even if you're leaving because you didn't like it, there's no reason to say it. I had a paramedic mentor. I was a paramedic, which is one of my jobs that I used to pay my way through college. I had a couple of crazy jobs. I know I love being a firefighter paramedic, but so when they were training paramedics, a lot of paramedics, they're all good-hearted people, but they weren't exactly soft. And some people took pride and aggression on being tough. Other people took pride in being soft, smooth, and emotionally intelligent. And I had this preceptor, his name was Arthur, and he says to me, Mike, he's like, I want to talk to you about your personality. He said, keep it. He said, you're soft and gentle with people. You treat everybody like it was your own mother. He said, keep that. He said, Mike, I promise you, for you to be nasty, it's going to take more effort for you to be nasty than it is to be nice. So just be nice. Kind of like the movie Roadhouse. Just be nice. Just be nice. Just be nice until it's not time to be nice. So try to just be nice. Great question, Freedom's Lands. If any of you have any last questions, we can do it. Otherwise, Alonzo and I are going to get back to the daily grind of stuff that we absolutely love to do anyway. Alonzo, you're muted. You're saying something, but muted.
Seems like, can you hear me?
Yes.
Okay, wonderful. Sorry about that. Another thing about if you're moving on to another position, think about your knowledge transfer. Make it easy for them to get the knowledge that they value you for, provided in great documentation that they can understand, or even you're able to hang around a little bit and help the person that is going to take on your old role while you transition into your new one. People understand, there are times where, the relationship, although it ended, it's not going to be a bad one. You're just moving on to other roles. However, cushion that blow for them of losing your value with something great, and it still is going to have an opportunity for you to maintain that relationship, and it might even flourish in the long run.
Yeah. And, Freedom Lands, I'm thinking of my first job. This guy named Devendra hired me. He was a really good guy, good, fair person. And ultimately what happened is while I worked for him, I passed my CCIE. And in those days, well, still today, but in those days, passing a CCIE meant your salary would just triple, and it would just triple overnight. And I got a call from Christina Marino, of all people, who you see on my show a lot of time. And she said, Mike, I need you to talk to this bank or on this investment house. I'm like, okay, why not? It's a day, whatever. And I literally went there. I had a conversation, and they offered something that was like almost triple my previous pay. And Devendra had been so nice to me and so fair to me. And he hired me when I had no experience as a senior engineer at the time. And then he moved me into the lead architect position. And I got to tell you, Freedom Lands, I felt so bad. And I remember going home that night and talking to my wife, and she's like, you sound like you need therapy over this. I'm like, she was making a joke. She's a nurse practitioner. And I'm like, no. And I said, I'm going to just talk to Devendra in the morning. So before I could even talk to Devendra, I called his manager, who was like the VP of architecture. And I said, can we speak? Can we have a conversation? So before I even had a chance to tell Devendra what happened the next day, Devendra calls me. It's at like 8:30 a.m. It's like, I got a call from Dan. He's like, could you please tell me why you scheduled a meeting with him in White Plains, New York? And I said, Devendra, I said, absolutely. I said, here's the thing, Devendra. I said, I wasn't looking for it, but I got an opportunity on Wall Street that honestly pays me almost 3 times the salary I'm receiving here. And I wanted to book a meeting with Dan to tell him that you were the best manager I've ever had in my life, that you were so decent and you were so fair, And then I apologize profusely for taking this new job, but it pays me almost 3 times my current salary. And I wanted him to know that you were the best and the strongest, and that it had nothing to do with you, because people typically quit their managers, not their companies. And I wanted him to know that the opportunity was so good I couldn't turn it down. Like in that Sopranos where they make you an offer you couldn't refuse, and I just couldn't refuse it. So Dan and I parted friends. Devendra was very thankful that I actually did that, because it didn't want to reflect poorly on him. And then I felt good about myself. So it always goes back to, and it still upsets me, you can see, thinking about it, almost 25 years later, because I felt like I wronged the guy, even though I didn't. But the point is just be your best self. Give others and treat others the way you want to be treated, and you will do great. So let's talk about some free things that we have to close out the day. In approximately 4 weeks, we will be doing a free AWS Solutions Architect Bootcamp. It'll have extra networking, extra security, and a little bit of extra AI stuff in it, because we want you to do great in your lives. It's completely free. Sign up now. It's in the chat box, the description, what have you. Join us tomorrow on the How to Get Your First Cloud Architect Job webinar. It's going to be lots of fun. We'll talk for about 30 minutes. After that, we'll answer any questions you may have for as long as you desire, upwards of 2 hours. I want to make sure you guys have everything you need to get hired. And please download that completely free guide on how to get your first cloud architect job. Got lots of free guides in the description of this video. Please go get it. If you've enjoyed your time here, please like this video, subscribe to the channel, hit the bell, etc., etc. Sandeep asked, will it be associate level or professional level? It will be somewhere in between. So the associate level is kind of basic. The professional level gets a little too techy at certain points. So it's going to be, I'd say, midway between the associate and professional, but we're going to spend a lot more time talking about the underlying technology. So instead of giving you 2 or 3 slides on, say, Azure, on like an Elastic Kubernetes service, we might spend a half an hour to 45 minutes just describing Kubernetes, so you understand it long before we even think we would talk about a cloud provider service. We'll do the same thing on relational databases, NoSQL databases. We want to give you a great time. And of course, it's all going to be free. So please sign up, please join, and we'll see you there. Take care, everyone. I will see you in the next video.
Looking forward to it.